It's just struck 2, so I'll just wait for Steve to take his seat and then we'll get started. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board on the 18th of October. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Carla Denyer and I'm the chair of this committee. I'll crack straight on. Introductions and safety information. Oh gosh, I had not prepared for that, sorry.
Yes, members. So if we're not expecting a fire alarm today, but if we do have one, if you could please follow the arrows out of the building and congregate over on near to College Green, or follow me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, so apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Councillor Morris. Any others? Doesn't look like it. No, okay. Next is declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any declarations of interest related to items on the agenda today?
I'll just mention I have a family member with an EHCP.
You've got a slightly crackly mic as well. Thank you. Okay, next up is minutes of previous meetings. I've spotted one error, which I'll just flag up, which is in the, so we've got two sets of minutes. We've got the ones from the last major OSM meeting in July and the brief one that we had after the work programme setting workshop in September. In the latter, in the minutes for the agenda for today, it says corporate strategy, corporate performance report and risk report. It should also say clean air zone because on the 20th of September, we believed that the clean air zone was going to be coming to this scrutiny meeting. But I'll explain for any members who are unaware and for the public that unfortunately we're not looking at clean air zone today, and that's because the council is still waiting to hear back from the government on the council's latest proposals, and so the officers don't have any new information to share with us as yet. And so that's now gone back onto the work programme in the pending section, and we'll be looking at it as soon as we have new information to look at. But yes, we didn't know that on the 20th of September, and therefore those minutes should have clean air zone added to that list of things that we thought we were looking at today. Are there any other comments or corrections on the minutes? No? Okay, lovely. Right, on to Chair's business then. Two things from me. One is apologies for this cough. I've had 4 lateral flow tests and 2 PCRs, and it's not COVID. But it's still a bit unpleasant to have the chair coughing down the microphone at you, so I apologise. Time constraints, I'm going to have to step down from this role. And I just wanted to say sorry, really, to everyone, because I know it's not ideal to have somebody in the chair only for a few months and then going out. But at the time that I put myself forward for this role, we didn't know that the Green Party was going to have a leadership election. So I had to, be flexible. And so, really apologies that I wasn't able to give this more of my time as I'd originally intended, but I want to make sure that whoever does do the role can give it their full attention. So the Green Group are allocated the chair of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, and so our group will be selecting for my successor shortly, and you'll hear in due course. Okay, so moving swiftly on, public forum. We've got a few different statements and questions, and some of those people are here in person. I'm going to start with going to Suzanne Audrey. Oh, hang on, wait. That's questions, not statements. Bear with me a second. Yeah, no, sorry. I'll do statements first. So Clive Stevens first, please. A roving mic is making its way towards you. Sorry to interrupt, Clive. You're not on.
So I have to say it again. One of the beautiful things about Scrutiny is your ability to look across topics, across silos, as some councillors call them. And here is a lovely example where you're looking at can look at the risk report on section 9 and compare it and apply it to the corporate strategy, which is coming to you in section 7. And I'm talking specifically about the risk of not building enough affordable homes. That's the CRR 32. And in item 9, it gives a very high chance, over 75% of it not being delivered. And I think that's probably accurate. And it also has a very high impact. And I think that's probably very accurate. And if you wish to look at what the impacts mean, which is on the last page when you get to this agenda item, on page, I think 28 or 29 of that appendix, it talks about extremely severe service disruption, possibly even special measures. So that seems that it's been graded correctly. So well done, audit, for making that happen. This problem of the shortfall on affordable housing delivery has been going on decades. In 2009, there was a report saying that they were underbuilding by 500-600 a year, waiting list of 7,000, and in 2019, that was still the case, but the waiting list was 13,000. And yet, if you look at South Gloucester, their waiting list is coming down, and they're achieving 35%. Now, their situation's a bit different than here, but I think there might be some things that we can learn from that. Now, jumping from that and applying it to the corporate plan, you've got a threat to all aspects of the corporate plan, especially key workers like carers.
Clive, I'm just going to wind you up because we need to allow time for everyone else.
I'm already wound up. I'll wind down then. So I think it's worth you considering the risk of not having enough people that can live in Bristol on low wages and its impact on the corporate plan. I've got a couple of questions which will come later, so I can go quiet now.
Thank you, Clive. As affordable, you mentioned that affordable housing is coming to us later. Although it's on the work plan for the overall scrutiny function, it's actually coming to growth and regen scrutiny, and I will therefore ask the chair of growth and regen scrutiny to note your comments and bear them in mind in setting the next agenda for his meetings. It looks like a thumbs up.
Duly noted.
Great. Okay, statement number 2 is from Councillor Christine Townsend about the forward plan.
Thank you. So my statement is drawing your attention to the Mayor's Forward Plan, which is item 11 on your agenda. It was when I checked a few days last week. I would like to highlight what was stated to us at People Scrutiny in July 2021 from the Director of Education and Skills, Alison Hurley. Quote, "We come back to Cabinet October, November time to allocate the new capital grant looking at the risk profile around Year 7, but also the means to allocate and identify funding available for specialist provision as well. So this is in relation to our much needed school places, both mainstream Year 7 and those for children with additional needs. The agenda paper in front of you does not list a school place capital paper for either November or for the December meeting. This should be a great concern to all of us. Families and children in Year 6 are currently applying for Year 7 mainstream school places that literally do not exist. We are not planning to we are in a position of putting the council at risk of not fulfilling one of our most fundamental legal duties for our children, the universal service of education. Those currently with an EHCP or being assessed for an EHCP that might need a special school place are also in that very same position. uncertainty of not knowing where or if their child might be able to access a place that can fully cater for their needs. Whilst the responsibility for ensuring school place sufficiency and communication of such sufficiency is entirely the responsibility of the administration, I stand before you today to officially put on the record the concerns of the Green Party councillors regarding this statutory issue. The current position places an additional uncertainty and anxiety onto families as a result of long-standing neglect and apathy from the elected mayor with regards to this children's universal statutory service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. I'm looking at the chair of People Scrutiny, who I imagine might be interested in looking at this in your next meeting. I don't know when that is and whether it's possible to do so.
Well, unfortunately, because scrutiny meets so infrequently, I don't think we're due to even meet in December. So I'm afraid although I completely agree with everything that Councillor Townsend has said, I don't actually see any value in trying to pass it back to People's Scrutiny, because there's no way we can act.
Could you angle your microphone so that it's pointing towards your face? Because I don't think it's picking you up very well.
I was trying to avoid the feedback problem.
I think the feedback is when you move it, whereas I think if you just move it to a fixed position and leave it, it should be okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Could I ask you perhaps in your role as chair to just write an email asking for an update on when that paper is expected to Cabinet? Because I think...
I can do. I'd already had a conversation with the Director of Education.
Or a conversation, but I think your role as chair gives you...
I'd already been informed similar to what you've received today in writing. But I will contact her again, because clearly there's no wriggle room at all with the timetable that's been set.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in your role as Chair of Scrutiny, you have some weight in that regard. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
It just does occur to me, if we're talking in terms of this and the need for investment, that there is a review of the investment programme as part of the budget process. So I'm just throwing that into the mix, that we could be bearing that in mind when we review the capital programme. So I'm mentioning that for Christine and for ourselves, that we should take that on board, because it's clearly a serious issue that should be being accounted for.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Noted. Okay, bear with me. I'm just checking a couple of different documents in parallel. Okay, so there's 3 statements from David Redgewell with a variety of other people with different hats. David's told us he's not able to make it. However, rather than just noting them, one of his statements raises the proposed ending of the Bristol to Waterloo train service that goes through Bradford on Avon, Trowbridge, etc. And specifically asks that we as OSM raise this with the Metro Mayor and MPs. I am fine with us as OSM doing that if other OSM members are, so I just wanted to get a sense of the room on that, and if so, we can get something drafted.
Yeah, Chair, I've raised this with the MPs, with the Metro Mayor at West of England Scrutiny and at Western Gateway as well. But any additional...
Did you say you have, or you will?
I have, yeah. But any additional letter writing is welcome.
Yes, as someone who personally uses that line to visit my family, I agree. But of course, I shan't let that influence my decision as OSM Chair. Okay, so I think that sounds like everyone's happy for us to do an official letter from OSM about that. We can capture that as an action. Thank you. Okay, moving on to questions now. Suzanne Audrey, you're up first.
Thank you, and I saw the reply just as I was leaving the House, so I'm here to be polite really, because the response says that my concern about the freedom of information, the percentage of freedom of information requests that are responded to, needs to go to the resources scrutiny. I have been asking about this for I think almost a couple of years now, and I didn't know whether there's an officer here that could reassure that any progress is being made, or whether I do need to wait entirely for the and put my question to resources.
So there will be an officer here later today when we get to the performance and risk parts of the agenda. They're not the officers who are responsible for the performance themselves, only of the performance report. But they may be able to answer questions at that stage if you're going to be around until the end. I don't know if you are. If not, we can inquire about it on your behalf.
It looks like a very interesting agenda today. So.
Oh. Sorry, Councillor. I'm here to introduce the Quarter 1 performance report.
Sorry,
later.
I forgot it was you.
I can in part respond. The performance, yes, it is normally reported or invariably reported to the resources scrutiny. The next meeting, which I think is at the start of November, I know we've corresponded several times in relation to this issue. There is a lot of work ongoing to centralise the process by which we deal with FOI requests. That will take a little bit of time to complete, but for a more comprehensive answer, I would certainly direct you to the service involved. Again, I'm happy to act as a conduit to do that if it would be useful. But what I tend to do is report on a performance which at this stage is 68% of those FOI requests have been responded to within 20 days.
Thank you very much. And sorry, I was scanning the room for a different officer. Apologies. Okay, next questions 2 and 3 from Clive Stevens.
Thank you. Whether you want to answer these now or during your discussion, I'll leave it up to you. I'll be going back and watching you on video later. So my first question is about whether OSM has confidence that the current systems for affordable housing will meet the 1,000 a year needed by 2024. And I think that might then help give a steer to the Chair of Growth and Regen, who's looking at the detail in November. So does anyone in OSM have confidence that you will meet the targets?
So I'll just draw everyone's attention first to the fact that we do have responses from officers answering the kind of numbery parts of Clive's questions. But as he stipulates, he is also interested in OSM members' opinion on whether they have confidence of the housing targets. I'll say, first of all, for myself, I don't think I have enough information to know if I do yet, but hopefully we'll be finding that out at Growth and Regen. Does anyone have anything particular that they want to add?
I think to a large extent we're victims of the market in this because we can't provide all the affordable housing ourselves as an authority. Developers will accelerate their delivery or slow it as market conditions suit them, I dare say. But as you said, Chair, we don't yet have anything like enough information to express a firm opinion on that. We can but hope that we get that later in the year.
Okay, thank you for that. My second question, which may well also have to wait until November, but is worth you considering now, is the impact on the corporate strategy. Now, on page 20 of the corporate strategy, it does talk about not having key workers as a risk, but it's like one line, and there doesn't seem to be any proper risk assessment saying the impact that it would have on different aspects of the corporate strategy. So again, I'd be grateful, and as you are going into the corporate strategy very soon, I'd be grateful for your views either now or when you're discussing that, and I can check it out on video later.
Thank you. I suggest we probably do that as we're discussing it in that case.
Okay, and I have a supplementary, which is to the Chair of the Growth and Regen Scrutiny. I think that's Councillor Wilcox. Given that South Gloucester seem to be performing better than Bristol, there will be obviously reasons for doing that, but they're nearly twice as high a percentage. It might be worth considering asking South Gloucester to attend Growth and Regen, someone from South Gloucester, to bring evidence as to whether the numbers I've given you are correct and how they're doing it. And there may be an opportunity for ideas for both authorities for working together. So that's a question to Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you for that, Clive. Yes, I've just written an email to find out what the process is for asking a South Gloss officer to come and talk to a Bristol Council Scrutiny Committee, and I will let you know.
Thank you very much, and I will move heaven and earth to be at Growth and Regen Scrutiny in November. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you for that. Okay, and next we're back to Councillor Christine Townsend for question 4, and there is a written answer from officers, which I can share with the room if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That would be good if you could share it. I
Okay.
just want to draw attention to the fact that it wasn't November and December that was mentioned at the People's Scrutiny. It was October and November. So the officer response is pushing that forward, and I want to draw people's attention to that.
Okay. So I'll just for people watching online or whatever, I'll just briefly summarise. So Councillor Townsend's question is asking for an explanation to members and parents on the same topic as her statement about when the authority will create Year 7 places for the September 22 entry and when progress on the Phase 2 Special School Places project will be made public. The officer response says that the November and December Cabinet dates, which actually were October and November, as Councillor Townsend's just pointed out, were a target to seek approval to allocate basic need funding to send capital projects and bulge expansions for Year 7 students. The decision is needed due to delays to the new Department for Education secondary schools in the city. The complexity of identifying how bulge classes can be introduced and the impact of a very volatile construction market on anticipated costs for projects has meant that sufficient confidence in budget has not been available to enable Cabinet to make a decision. Confidence in cost is now being secured, allowing the decision to enter the decision pathway with a February Cabinet date now the expected outcome. Timelines for delivery show there is sufficient time to meet the bulge requirements for September 22 and would allow immediate mobilisation in February for the next SEND capital projects. The location of schools that will have bulge classes will be communicated as soon as possible. So that's the officer response we've received. Caveated that the relevant people to answer it may not be in the room, and so you may need it in writing. Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, my supplementary would be what impact does the delay in mainstream secondary schools have on the delay in announcing the SEN places?
Okay. Are we able to ask an officer to respond to Councillor Townsend in writing after?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question is from Hayley Hemming, but I think they're not here. And likewise, Christina Biggs. Shout now if you are. Oh, I don't think you're either of those, but
Sorry,
go on.
can I, just a point on the answers to Hayley Hemming. My council iPad will not allow me to access the open data, and therefore I do not have sight of that information. I'm sure there's a very good reason why I'm not allowed to access it, but it would be very helpful if the actual updated information could be circulated to members as well.
Let me just see if that is just you or if it is me too. I got an earlier Word version of the public forum in which the link was working for me. So I'm just going to find out.
Well, mine tells me it's not allowed for security reasons. So
It's working fine for me.
right,
So it might be a device issue for you, I think.
okay. Well, so it's an iPad issue.
Okay, yeah,
So-
sorry, that's a question to redirect to...
Well, could we ask for that information? And also, it would be really helpful if the one piece of information that's missing in terms of the EHCPs is actually how many are outstanding at the end of any one month. And it would be very helpful if we could also be told that information, because I couldn't find it from the information that was available.
Chair, I realise you don't want to debate this at this point, but can we come back to this when we're looking at the risk register and the performance indicators? Because actually within these questions and answers, it does reveal a potential major crisis looming regarding the EHCPs. And I think I know that figure, and it's probably the highest figure we've ever seen, which is not good, as we had put in place additional support and officers to clear a backlog. And I think that backlog is actually higher than it was a year or two ago.
Yeah, I think let's come back to this, and feel free, if I don't remember, raise it when we get to the risk bit. Just looking at that link now, the link is the same data that is in the screenshot in table 1 of the public forum. The only difference is that with the link you can see further back in time. But yeah, we'll get an... Even to the public forum statement?
Chair, I've got the same problem. On a ThinkPad, I can't see it either.
Oh, okay. But, okay, so we will try and get that sorted out of this meeting. But what I'm saying is, in the public forum PDF document, there is a screenshot of a table, and that contains the same information as the information at that link. So you do actually have the relevant...
But it doesn't, because the officer response says that there is more updated information on the link, and taking Tim's point, I've been concerned that every time I've seen these figures, the number being answered in a month is less than the number being added in a month, which led me to believe what Tim has just confirmed is the position is deteriorating. And if we are not allowed access to the information that shows it's deteriorating, we're being prevented from arriving at the inevitable conclusion. So that's just why I would like to see that information confirming the deterioration in the course of this year.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm sorry, I don't know why the link is working for me and not you, but yes. Okay, let's get that to you afterwards. Okay, so I think we're done on public forum now, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so next we're moving on to corporate strategy, and I think we're going to start with a brief verbal presentation from Jean Cadler, who's the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the Council.
Thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me to present today. So I'm presenting the draft Corporate Strategy 2022 to 2027. This is a refresh and building upon of the current corporate strategy, which was published in 2018 and runs through till 2023. But obviously the new one will supersede that. So within it, we set out the vision for the city and the ways we will address the challenges we're facing, not least as we continue to address and recover and renew from the COVID pandemic. The corporate strategy contains the building blocks which influence everything we do, and alongside these are our key strategic priorities, which are thematic and they align to the One City plan themes. We hope this will enable us to deliver both of those plans more effectively together, both as a council and with our partners as a city. So we're coming to use pre-decision scrutiny. The corporate strategy report is due at Cabinet on the 2nd of November and full council on the 7th of December. I know that some of you participated in the cross-party members' internal working group specifically set up to contribute to the corporate strategy, which met 5 times during August and September, and we really appreciate the input that group provided to the development of this draft of the corporate strategy, which we're now presenting to you today. This is really the final opportunity for any comments and contributions to the strategy before papers are dispatched to Cabinet, so really welcome this afternoon's discussion. I thought it worth also mentioning heads of service are currently producing their draft service plans for next year. These obviously align to the new corporate strategy. And once the corporate strategy is approved, in the new year, we will produce a business plan and performance framework, which sets out the actions and targets we will take as a council to meet those priorities which we established in the corporate strategy. And I hope just in the future, as we've done previously, we would really welcome input from OSM and Scrutiny Committee members in the development of the business plan. So we look forward to come back in the new year with that. So that was just a very brief introduction, because I know many of you had already contributed a lot to the draft, but obviously very happy to take further comments and questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm sure members will have already read this, but just to draw everyone's attention to the fact that as well as the latest draft of the corporate strategy in our papers, we also have a track changes version from the version that was consulted upon. There's also a report from the member working group, which was a subgroup of this OSM committee, talking about what changes happened as a result of our input and how we felt about the process. And also there's a supplementary paper that was just published this morning, which had more detail about consultation responses from organisations that were consulted. And I'll just pass on officer apology for that being late. I think that was due to an officer being unwell, and so it got waylaid, unfortunately. So, yeah, they wanted to say sorry about that. Okay. I'm just going to throw this open. We've got potentially quite a long time, up to about 50-55 minutes for this agenda item if we want it. If we need that long, and then I'm going to propose that we take a short comfort break before the next agenda item, so we can do this until about 3:30. So, who would like to make the first points? Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. Bristol City Council is currently running a quality of life survey, and I'm interested to find out if those results will affect the current corporate strategy, or are you using last year's? Please.
Certainly, Councillor Wilcox, I can answer that one. It's currently last year's, but the quality of life that's out next time round will inform or be based upon the future corporate strategy, but the two just didn't quite cross over at this moment in time, which is why they don't match up.
Yep, Councillor Foder.
Thanks very much, Chair. Can I just start with something really positive, which is I don't think, and this is my 8th year as a councillor, I don't think I've ever seen a scrutiny item where you see the previous document, the new document, and the track changes, and the analysis of responses. And I'd like to say that is really refreshing, and it's really helpful, because we can see directly what regard, if regard, has been made to what we've said, how it's been incorporated, and how it correlates with the other feedback that's been gathered in the analysis of the feedback. And that's really positive, and I'd like to see more of that, because I think it's really helpful for us to see that scrutiny and the working group, which I wasn't part of, but I can see that it has been listened to and changes have been taken on board, and that's really helpful. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes, I second that. Okay, who wants to go next? Okay, while you... Oh, go on.
Yes, yep. Sorry. Further to what Martin's just said, actually, on page 4 of the tracked changes document, there's a large paragraph been inserted there. And I think it's very helpful to see that paragraph inserted, because it gives an indication of the scale of the challenges that the strategy is trying to address.
Yeah, okay, I'll jump in now while other folks are having a think. I'm first just going to quickly highlight a few that are genuinely just, I think, possibly typos or layout things, but I will ask because in some cases I'm not totally sure if they are. So on page 23 of our papers, which I think is 3 of the corporate strategy, that big diagram of how all the organisations work together, it wasn't clear to me why the dark blue bar has policy and strategy framework twice in it. and I wondered whether one of those was meant to say something else.
Off the top of my head, I'm going to struggle to know what is the third item, but I agree that can't be, that doesn't look right, does it? So
yes. So if I can just leave that with you to take away and find out what words were meant to be there.
Definitely. Could I just also add, we're still obviously, we are proofing the document. It's a big comprehensive document, so do apologise for any errors like that. We'll be picking them up, but thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, apologies. I'm one of those people that can't spot a type. I can't
not miss them.
Yeah, anyway. So I'll just mention them briefly, but no need to respond, just things to take away. Page 6, which is the one with the map of Bristol and the stats, it says it compares us to the other 8 English core cities. That should either say the 8 or the other 7, I think. Unless there's a new core city I don't know about. And then on page 27, which is the environment and sustainability theme front page, there is a new paragraph about adding we need similar urgency related to the ecological emergency. That whole paragraph needs a spelling and grammar check. It's just fallen foul of some inserting.
Which paragraph was that?
So it's the bottom paragraph on the left-hand side of page 27. We need similar urgency and collaboration in also tackling the ecological emergency facing the city. Yeah, so working alongside partner.
Yeah.
And there's a few other typos in that block.
No problem. I suspect that was probably one of the later changes.
Looked like it. Yeah, exactly. And then an actual substantive point for me to finish off is in HC2, lower carbon homes. I see the rationale and agree with changing this section heading from healthier homes to lower carbon homes to be more explicit about what it's talking about. But I was a bit concerned to see in the track changes that we will continue to deliver, or we will deliver carbon neutral homes has been replaced with we will deliver lower carbon homes, which seems to be watering down and contradicting our carbon neutral targets. So yeah, I would like to find out more about what the rationale is for that and why, whether it has to be that way or not. And also, again, just pedantically, the track changes didn't work perfectly, and so it actually, in the report in here, it says we will continue to deliver lower carbon neutral homes, just because a word hasn't been edited. But yeah, the point really is changing from carbon neutral to lower carbon and why that is.
Yeah, can I respond to that? So we'll go back again to growth and regen for clarity on that, but my understanding from discussions was what is actually something that we can actually do as opposed to what we might want to do. So I think that was the reason that the change was made, was realistically reflecting what's within our powers to do. But I'm happy to take that away and go back to the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration to clarify that point for you.
And bearing in mind that we're saying that the Council will be carbon neutral by 2025 in its own operations, and this strategy goes until past that, if we're not aiming for carbon neutral, then we're contradicting ourselves. And so one of those things is not true, which is obviously not a situation we want to be in. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I'm not sure that this is necessarily going to be helpful. But, and I'm going back to page 4 of the track changes document again, in the forward, page 111 of our pack. The insertion of, with our raw materials of 42 square miles of land and 460,000 people, 42 square miles of land is an area that I find difficult to visualize. So perhaps an insertion giving a comparison. London is X square miles. Keynsham is Y square miles. Also, later in that paragraph, scheduled to grow by almost 100,000 residents by 2050. 42 square miles and 460,000 people is about 11,000 people per square mile. So perhaps drawing a comparison that in order to maintain our current population density, that growth by 2050, we'd need an extra 9 square miles of city to accommodate them at our current density. Perhaps drawing that point out and making it rather more obvious than me having to calculate it would be helpful, because that would surely be indicative of what the city's going to have to start to look like if we're going to accommodate all those people. Am I making any sense here?
You are making sense. If it's all right, I'll just jump in. So
Yeah.
on the helping people to visualise 42 square miles, I think comparing to a couple of other towns and cities to give people a sense of scale might be good for that. I'm not sure I do agree with the suggestion of framing the population increase in terms of how much bigger the city would need to be, because in that you're assuming that Bristol wants the same population density, whereas actually there are many parts of the city that currently have a low population density that's not high enough to sustain local high streets, for example, and the city's plan involves densification of some areas of the city, and so framing it as though we're going to do one thing when we're actually going to do the other is...
I'm keen to shine a light on the pressures that we're under, and actually, by extension, we can say that there are parts of the city that are already at a very high density, and therefore areas at lower density are going to have to take extra density. As I say, I'm not sure that any of this is helpful, but I think it might further the intention of highlighting the pressures that the city's coming under.
Thank you. Can I say overall I found this a really interesting document to read. There's obviously been a lot of work gone into it, and I found it very helpful. However, on page 89 of our pack of papers, where it talks about the number of responses per 10,000 of the population, I was pretty shocked to see that Hot Wells and Harbourside had 31, and my ward, Southmead, had 3. Now, in the past, the council has sent people out to sort of stand in the street and talk to them, because, quite frankly, my residents have got a lot more to think about quite often than just filling in forms, but they have got definite ideas, and I just wondered whether that approach was taken this time.
I think there's some information about that in the papers. I'm just rushing to try and get to it. Any officer that knows the answer off the top of their head, do jump in.
Obviously, because of the COVID restrictions, that sort of limited to some extent what normal or previous measures we might have taken, what steps we might have taken. I don't know if people remember previously we've had the team out in Broadmead, for example, in the shopping centre, and those kind of activities, unfortunately, we weren't able to undertake on this occasion. But we are mindful that it is not a fully representative sample. I think we've made that really clear in our papers, and we can only apologise that that is where we are. Obviously, as I did mention earlier, we will have the business plan early in next year, and hopefully there'll be further opportunity for consultation at that point.
Thank you. It's just a shame that some groups in more disadvantaged wards really haven't had much of a say in this, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the sessions that the member working group had was about looking at the consultation approach, and we did feed in a few things for them to do if possible, but yeah, there were COVID restrictions. I mean, the council did do all the usual things of making paper versions available in libraries and community centres and reaching out to key groups that are better connected with those those groups we don't hear from so often in consultations. But I agree that it's still not adequate, and yeah, a lot of those libraries weren't open. Only some of them were. So yes, noted.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I had a number of specific comments. One is on page. Sorry, I'm now at the wrong end of the document. I'll go backwards. Page 155, the track changes version talks about community participation, and I was disappointed to see that ward councillors aren't actually identified in that. It talks about all the other cultural and social networks, individuals, communities, partners, and all of their roles. But it would be important to my mind to see the role of elected councillors as reflecting their communities, being the people who often convey their views of communities into the council and so on. I won't repeat what the chair said about lower carbon homes, because I spotted that too. On page 140, again, the track changes version, it talks about waste reduction as a heading, and then ENV3 changes to cleaner Bristol. To my mind, they're both important. We know there's been a big emphasis on cleaning up streets and tidying Bristol and so on with a big tidy. But that is different from waste reduction and promoting, reducing, reusing and recycling and putting the waste to use again. In fact, sometimes people are quite concerned that litter might not be segregated, so it doesn't reduce waste, it all gets destroyed afterwards. So it would be helpful to just clarify that, are we talking about only one or both, in which case it somehow needs to explain the commitment to reducing consumption and resource waste. I noted on page 100 there was comment about feedback on use of the term economic growth, and I would kind of echo that myself, because economic growth is not the same as development or inclusive growth. It just implies a bigger economy. And I thought we were going beyond that. The talk about good jobs and so on implies we're being selective about what we want more of, and we're also clear that some things we want less of, because there are very damaging impacts from more activity in the economy if it's the wrong activity. There's an error on page 89, which is the stats about the wards. It shows, I was just looking at the colour coding, because it shows very interesting, as Councillor Massey said, there are different response rates. But when it came to 8 responses in Lockleys, it appears to be coloured in the 3 to 7 part of the map. So if someone glanced at the map, they wouldn't actually see the correct answer there. It's as if, I think the stat has just been mixed up there. Because the colour coding hasn't been followed. In terms of the comments about this being a very high-level document on page 84, I felt that too when I was reading it. It says so many good things, and we'd love them all, but we don't know if they're then going to be implemented. What really matters is if the statements made and the commitments made are delivered into action by the council, action by partners, investment, changes to services, or changes to priorities. And so to that extent, it's a very general document. It says lots of nice things. And when we were asked to feed back, what I found was it bundled several things in each answer. So if you wanted to say, I like that, but I don't like that, in the same bundle, you couldn't in the feedback. You had to make the effort of finding the text box later on and saying, I only agreed with half of this issue. It just would make sense to keep separate issues separately, so we can comment on them all and we can actually identify which we do prioritise and which we don't, because otherwise it felt like we were being told, here's a whole bundle, take it or leave it, all in one. The role of scrutiny comes up on page 77, and I'd just like to heartily endorse the commitment to enable effective democratic decision-making and scrutiny. And there have been frustrations in the past, such as access to a forward plan that helps us plan our scrutiny, and access to documents when we're trying to do the scrutiny that sometimes aren't available or are in a locked room that we can only see the bundle in when we're sitting there. And it would be nice to see that translated into action. There's something on page 73, I've only got a few more, Chair. It talks about the one city approach and the one city partnerships. And until we actually have an opportunity to scrutinise the council's part in that, I always remain a bit sceptical as to what is said in one city meetings and then who is actually going to act on them and who's going to help them, and whether representatives in those meetings or participants in those meetings can take them back and make sure their own organisation, including the council, actually delivers what it says. Because in the past it's looked like one city strategies are lists of ideas that might or might not be implemented, and each year they're amended and changed, and we don't know, are we going to act on them? Is someone else acting on them? Are we contributing to making them happen? Or are they just hopes that year by year certain things will happen in the city? It's great that organisations can align their commitments through the one city approach, through shared work, but then someone has to take ownership of it. And just to this date, I'm still not sure. But we do now have a cabinet member who's got one city in their title, so hopefully that will improve. I've got a query about the voluntary and community sector in page 66. The last paragraph on page 66 says, we're making greater investments in community-based organisations and local infrastructure to strengthen the role of VCSE, voluntary and community sector partners, to build community capacity, etc. I might be mistaken, but I thought the budgets for that had cut. So if there are greater investments, presumably we'll find growing budgets or a larger budget than there was previous to this document being approved. So once it's approved, the budget will go up, because it was going down last I heard. And that's frustrating. There have been cuts, there's been austerity. But if we're saying we're making greater investments, I hope we will live up to that, because it is so important. And then finally on page 50, there's a section on waste. And it talks about commitments that have been made many times before. So I suppose my kind of warning light was, it says we're going to open Hartcliffe Way Reuse and Recycling Centre, we're going to reduce the large item collection fee, we're going to make it easier for people living in flats to recycle, and we'll increase the enforcement against fly tipping and litter, and then work with communities to reduce clutter. It's been really hard to get enforcement support. We were told there'd be like one visit a year to deal with one fly tipping site in my ward. I don't know if that's proportionate or not. But these commitments about Hartcliffe Way and about collection fees and so on seem to be quite explicit. So again, I just hope they're carried out, because year after year we've asked about flat recycling, hard to recycle blocks, and the configuration of people living in high-rise. It has a lower service and often a lower recycling rate. I hope it will be improved. So again, I hope there will actually be investment to implement that, and then some of our concerns would have been acted on. So thanks. Sorry, it was a long list. No.
Made my pedantic points look not very thorough at all. Thank you, Councillor Foda. Jean, did you have any responses to any of that?
Yeah, I'll do my best in find it in order of what you said on all of them. Around the community participation and naming councillors, I'll go, if that's all right, I'll take that one away with me. You talked about economic growth. It is our intention that the corporate strategy is around inclusive and sustainable growth. If that isn't clear, and if there's a specific point you think that that's just is not articulating it in the right way, please just, I'd be grateful of just an email or something with the actual line. Yeah. And then the Cleaner Bristol, that was changed as a result of consultation and discussions with a number of people internally and possibly with your working group, that they felt it wasn't broad enough, and that's why it's changed from the previous heading to Cleaner Bristol. We can go back again and obviously consider again to make sure we're capturing everything. It was intended to cover beyond waste, but including waste. But I'll take that one away as well. But that is one of the ones which I know there's been a lot of internal discussion around to try and capture everything and say all the things that people have said that they wanted. I'll leave the statistics on the wards one possibly to Guy, or we'll take that one away. I mean, it is a high-level document, as you pointed out. It is intended to be a strategy with high-level aspirations and ambitions for the next 5 years, which, with the detail, should come through the business planning process, which I highlighted at the beginning, and we'll come back to you in the new year with that business plan, and hopefully that will get into that more meaty detail and depth that you're looking for. On terms of One City, obviously there's lots of different ways that One City we contribute to One City and One City contributes to us. In the business plan, we do try to identify those actions that are drawn from the One City plan that the council is responsible for delivering. I'll leave it with colleagues who are responsible for One City to talk more broadly, and I take your point away that obviously the sort of relationship between One City and yourselves is something that is probably beyond my role, but I'm happy to take that one away. I can't answer the question off the top of my head around the investment and the voluntary sector questions. I will need to take that one with me. I hope that's all the points that you made. I don't know, Guy, if you wanted to mention anything on these statistics.
Yeah, we'll look into that for you, certainly around the start. The colour one, that's clearly an error. We'll get that right. And look at consultation approaches within areas where there's been historically low response rates.
And Mike Jackson wanted to come in quickly on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to add to Jean's response on One City. So in previous years, Andrea Dell, who's the head of the One City office, has been to OSM and briefed and answered questions about the overall One City approach. I'm sure she'd be happy to do that again if you wanted to prioritise it in your work programme. But just to highlight what Jean said, in terms of your ability to scrutinise the council's element of the One City approach, you are free to do that as it comes through the business and service planning process. That's something you can choose to do. But again, it's about, you know, whether you want to prioritise that in your work plan above other things. But there's nothing to stop you doing that if you wanted to look at the council's contribution to the One City.
Okay, I do have 3 other hands up, but I am just going to allow Councillor Fodo to query.
Yeah, thank you. It was just that until we have documents that identify who does what in the One City documents, they're sort of documents sitting there, and they're not cross-referenced with specific council commitments. We get council strategies, but they're the ones we can look at. So unless they're identified, this is us taking the lead on, you know, commitment, whatever, from the One City strategy, of which there are several, it's quite hard to do. It's just making sure it's quite explicit. What are we leading on, and where are we sending support to things that are in those other documents that we're not scrutinising?
I mean, I think we do that. I think there's an element of that in the corporate strategy that links to the One City. So I'm sure there's. I guess the point I wanted to make is if you want to follow through on the council's contribution to elements of the One City, you can do that. But I mean, it's your decision about how you prioritise it within your work programme.
Well, fellow OSM members, I'm going to have to leave that up to you, since this is my last one, to decide if you want to do that. I just want to jump in on one tiny thing, which is the point that Martin made about waste, the section that was called waste reduction and is now called Cleaner Bristol. And I do see that in the content of that section, it makes quite clear that both are important. They are, in my head, they are different things, though, and I wonder if it's not unreasonable to just give up trying to come up with a title that, you know, decide between them and just have a title for that section, which is Cleaner Bristol and Waste Reduction, which is, I appreciate it's not as, doesn't trip off the tongue as well, but it might be more plain English in terms of explaining what it's seeking to do. Right, now, I've got Councillor Bradshaw, then Councillor Kent, then Councillor Wilcox, then Councillor Gollop. And then we're probably at the end of this item.
Thanks, Chair. My comments aren't a line-by-line comment on the drafting. But it's more about themes that I think are important, because I think the corporate strategy ought to talk about things that we want to encourage as a city with our partners. So I'd like a more explicit reference to social enterprise. I know it's mentioned, but it's mentioned as part of a description of other activities. And I think it's been a long-term strength of the Bristol economy that we have thriving social enterprises and we have encouraged them. So I'd like to see a bit more about that in a more upfront way. And likewise on social value, I know in terms of the council's own procurement, we encourage this, but there's still much confusion about the methodologies for calculating and showing social value. And I think this is an opportunity for the council to be a bit more descriptive about what we want to encourage and what we are looking for. I'd also like to see more mention around financial exclusion. I think the pandemic has shown that financial exclusion, particularly for those who are not online, without smartphones, etc., is a particular challenge. And I'd like to see us addressing that in a clearer way. I think community resilience does come through, and again, this is one of the lessons of the pandemic, that we have very strong local networks which have been really, really effective. And I think the corporate strategy, because of the timing of this exercise, is an opportunity to underline that. And my final point is on the council-owned companies. Given where I've come from over the last couple of years, I'm very keen that the strategy shows very clearly how they are a delivery partner, how they're part of the journey for the city. And I wonder if there's some more explicit content that we can put in there about what the council companies do, our relationship with them, and how they are partners for some of these broader ambitions in the city, not just on waste, but on a whole range of other things, including affordable housing. And those are my comments.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you want to come back on, or shall I collect a few points? Great. Okay, Councillor Kent next.
Okay, thanks. I'll try to be brief. I was just looking at page 38 in our pack, page 18 of the corporate strategy, the equity in education. Looking at it, I guess I was slightly concerned that the wording, the second paragraph, which was the wording around the universities, I guess without trying to sound combative, sounded a bit more like an advert for them rather than necessarily something which I felt should be here. I mean, there's very limited space, and I just wonder how many people benefit from these specific interventions they talk about. Especially when you look about the fact that only 22% of children and young people from South Bristol actually go to university. I'm finding it sort of hard to swallow that paragraph, really, to be honest. I'm a little concerned that the only statistic, well, the statistics given around are all fairly negative, but I mean, in one sense, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're reflecting that we've got things to tackle, but the absence rates, I sort of notice when people put stats in, that then becomes the thing they obsess about in future. And absence rates is put in right at the top, which obviously kids need to be in school to be able to teach them. Absence is a very complicated issue, which I think, to be fair, you go on to explore quite well in the text. I'm a little bit worried, I say, that we've got such a strong mention where it does mention further education providers, but it very much is framed around the universities. And I just feel that there should be a bit more talked about further education there. I know it is a few pages on under skills and employment, but I just thought something in there about, because that is another educational leap where we lose people, that sort of when they leave secondary school and they go in. I think that just needs to be framed in there. That was all I really wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments if you don't mind. So on page 69, where we talk about improved bus services, I'm assuming this is an aspirational document, because where you say we will work to make sure there are, no, that's the wrong sentence, We will also need to make sure that more remote or deprived parts of the city are not left disconnected or disadvantaged by proper access to bus services, because that's exactly what has just happened with the number 5 service in Bristol, where that service has been withdrawn, and it serves the areas of Bristol where they have the lowest rates of car ownership, and they really rely on that service. So we might want to think about that in that sentence. In page 70, where we talk about active travel, I would like to see the word connected there for segregated cycle facilities from both pedestrians and vehicles, because we have quite a few good examples of segregated infrastructure in Bristol, but it's not connected up, and people find it difficult to negotiate between the two, between the sites. And I completely agree with Councillor Fodor's comments about the waste elements that was talked about, and I would really like to see a commitment in numbers and a timescales about how we will get waste enforcement officers, because fly tipping is a huge issue for this city, and it needs to be dealt with appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Now, I know I have you. Did I have you first? I've lost track now. No. Councillor Gollop, then.
Right, thank you, Carla. Right, having been a member of the cross-party working group, it would be wrong to go into specifics that I raised at that point. I just wanted to make a few general comments. Having been involved in more of these corporate strategy settings than I probably care to remember, I'm a sceptic on the whole exercise, because, in a sense, all it can do is prioritise things that we all agree with. The argument becomes about how you put them in order, and that is a much more difficult exercise. But I did want to commend the process that's happened this time. Firstly, we have a document where I can understand most of the priorities that are in there, and I go back to a time when that was not possible with the authority's corporate strategy. So I think that's very positive. And I'd also commend the way the team have engaged with members, because they have largely removed my ability to complain when this comes to Cabinet or full council by engaging with me. So I see that as a good move on their part, and it does reflect an enormous amount of work that's gone in to bring it to this stage. What I wanted to do, I was looking at the response by ward, and this is a question I think we should be considering beyond this process, because I see that we had 522 responses, and if I work out how many people I think there are in each ward, I think my ward might just have had the highest or close to the highest actual number of responses, which I think out of 15,000 electors would probably have come in at 22 responses. And something in the statistician in me looks at that and thinks that isn't a very high level of response. And I use that in the context of my ward, which has a natural instinct to respond to surveys, and has done so for many years. So I do look at it and think we've got something wrong, because if this document, as is important as I believe it is, and as we are told it is, to get 22 people out of 15,000 to respond cannot in any way be representative. Now, I accept the 522 across all 30 whatever wards may be slightly more representative, but Brenda made the point for Southmead, but actually it's not even good for the wards that are responding, and I really do think we ought to be asking as OSM for a review of what we do and how we do it, because if our corporate strategy sets the way we operate for the next 4 years, if we cannot get our residents to relate to that process and the importance of that process, we failed somehow. So, and Mike, that's not a criticism, because I recognise it's actually a challenge and it's very difficult to do. but I am suggesting that it's something that perhaps OSM might wish to engage with the executive over a period of 2 or 3 years before this exercise is refreshed again. Thank you.
Point well made and heard. However, just to make you aware, the previous OSM meeting, which you weren't able to attend, we looked at the consultation and engagement strategy. That was one of the main items on the agenda for OSM. So whether it's appropriate to bring it back again so soon to a full OSM meeting, I'm not sure, but that'll be a decision for my successor and the other OSM leads ultimately. Mike, you wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I do absolutely understand members' concern about this and can completely see why. All I would say is that the Council actually has a really good track record of outreach and engagement over the last few years. Corporate strategies are particularly hard to engage the general public on because of their general nature. So the Council has actually conducted award-winning public consultations on its budget over the last few years, where we massively increased the response rate because of a very proactive approach to reaching out to the diverse communities of the city. It's much harder to do that with a high-level strategy document, and for the reasons that Jean gave, when COVID prohibits you from some of the things that you would have chosen to have done if we could have done. I'm pretty sure Tim Borrett has told me that this response rate, disappointing though it is higher than the response rate we had for the last corporate strategy. So I think you've just got to acknowledge it's something to do with the nature of the document as much as anything else. That's not to say, you know, we wouldn't welcome ideas about how we could do it better going forward, but I just wanted to emphasise it's very difficult with strategic documents to get the public interested. It's just the reality, I think, to some degree.
Okay, I'm going to hand back to Jean in just a second, but I'm just going to add a bit more weight to one of the points in that latest round before I hand back to you. Which is the point about the text about the university. So in the track changes version in the appendix, and also in the agenda supplement of the consultation responses that we were sent earlier today, you'll see that of several institutions that were asked for input, I'm sure that the institutions asked were much longer than this list, but some of them responded in detail, one of which was University of Bristol. And I do think that, you know, much as I love the University of Bristol, I do think that in some cases it looks like the council has taken their suggested text, complete copy-paste, and perhaps adopted a little bit too much of the university's own spin in that. I can completely understand why they want to, obviously, present the work they do in as positive a light as possible, but I do wonder whether you know, there's several long paragraphs about the university that have been added in like 4 or 5 different places in the corporate strategy, and whether we should really be just, you know, taking those 150 word blocks word for word direct from the university without adding our own interpretation. I think it would be good to go back and look at that, and I had meant to raise that, so thank you very much for reminding me of that point. It also feels like the insertion of the content, the sort of uncritical insertion of the university's suggestions somewhat undoes some of the work from the member working group, because in that item about educational equity, or whatever it's called, equity in education, it was originally quite university centric, and we fed back in the member working group that that was not the point. The point isn't to get a few more % of people to university, it's to make sure that the basic standard of education for everybody is up to scratch, and then sort of university is a consequence of that. And so there were some changes from the first draft to the draft that was consulted on to reflect that, but then this looks like that's undoing that a little bit. So there we go. That's my 2 pence worth. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you. Well, just on the university point, I think we'll take that one away again. I think it's a fair point that's been made. Just to bear in mind, obviously we've got 2 world-leading, you know, excellent universities within Bristol, and obviously we want to ensure that we're also working well in partnership with them, and all the benefits they bring to the city, as well as any of the challenges. So, but I take away the sort of specifics. Likewise with the further education, I think that's a really good point, that we probably haven't fully reflected that in the drafting. So totally accept that point. Quite sure where to go because there's so many comments. On the just to say, in terms of the consultation, obviously we want to consult more, and get as many views as possible. But we don't only rely on the consultation specifically of the corporate strategy to involve people's views in the development of the corporate strategy. So we had the Citizens' Assembly earlier this year. Obviously, that has also informed the corporate strategy. We have got the Quality of Life survey from whenever that was last done. Guy can remind me. And then the Quality of Life survey, obviously, each year informs our business plan. And the Quality of Life survey obviously has a much higher response rate, but it costs us a lot more money. So it is always a balance. So just to bear in mind, we're not only relying on specific consultation responses, though we will obviously always do our best to get them. We do look for a number of methods of engaging with the public to inform our thinking beyond the obvious, the specific formal consultation. In terms of any specific points I wanted to come back to, obviously, I've made note of more reference to social enterprises, and I'll come back and think about that. The social value, we do obviously have a specific policy and strategy on social value, as we have on many policies addressing much more specific detail on specific subjects and issues. So obviously we need to refer to that as well. So we would never expect one document to capture everything. We are trying to have a suite of documents that can be read should anyone want to in conjunction with each other. But I'll take that away to make sure that we are capturing that as well as we can. I will leave possibly Mike if he wants to mention anything specific on the council companies at the end. The absence rates, why we mention them, I think is really valid point, because it's as a living document, and if we put in the absence rates for say this year, what happens next year? So maybe I'll take that one away, and maybe we'll look at that. Likewise, the point about buses. Clearly, this is an aspirational document. This is a strategy, it's an ambition of what we want to achieve. We recognise the challenges we're also facing, but point well made, I thought. Likewise, we've discussed around waste already, and I've made notes of the comments, and hopefully we can look at that again. And yeah, we also, just to finish, to Councillor Gollett's point, we really do appreciate and enjoy the engagement we have with members in the development of these documents and work. We think it actually benefits the outcome and benefits the work that we do, and we appreciate the comments back. So thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for your really interesting discussions this afternoon.
Great, thank you very much. Any final last thoughts on that? No? Okay, in that case, we are running ahead of schedule. Well done, everybody. So I'm going to suggest that we have a slightly more generous 10-minute comfort break rather than a 5-minute one. So you've got time to go to the loo and get yourself a cup of tea, and we will come back here at 3:30 on the dot. Thank you. Are we back to broadcasting? Yeah, great, okay. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you've got a nice cup of tea. So the next two agenda items are the Corporate Performance Report, Q1, and the Corporate Risk Report. And I'm going to make a suggestion that we discuss these together because there are some overlaps, and I think it would make sense for OSM to have an overall sense of the both of them. So if it's okay, I'm going to ask the two officers who are here to present them to present both, one after the other, and then we'll have a joint discussion, if that's all right. Okay, so I think over to you first. So Guy Collings is the Head of Insight, Performance and Intelligence at the Council.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm here to introduce the Q1 Performance Report. This sets out the progress around the themes established in the Corporate Strategy 2018 to 2023, but more specifically in the current business plan. Members, I know, have had sight of the document in advance, and I'm here to take any questions that you may have around them. There's a distinct possibility that if the question is detailed, I may have to revert to the specific service area and get back to you in due course. The headline figures from it are that 64% of the indicators are on or above target, and a similar number, 64%, are better or the same as the same quarter last year. The report contains a narrative for each of the themes, and that's set out across pages 183 to 186 in your pack. And there is a summary page with the areas that we pick out as being of specific interest, either doing well or doing less so well, on page 188. And then there is an appendix beyond that, which sets out each of the indicators, the current performance levels around them, and then the narrative from the service area that's been provided to us in the course of compiling the report. As always, absolutely happy to take questions at this point, but I'll hand over to Paul for the risk report and then answer questions in relation to performance thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you. So now over to Paul Drury, who's the Risk and Insurance Officer. Thank you.
So I'm here to introduce the Corporate Risk Report for Q1. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the current significant strategic risks to achieving the Council's objectives as set out in the Corporate Strategy 2018 to 2023. And summarise progress in managing these risks and actions being taken as at Q1 2021 and 2022. So some of the headlines from the report. There's 3 critical risks listed in the report. These are CRR 41, long-term major capital projects, CRR 32, failure to deliver enough affordable homes to meet the city's needs, and CRR 9, safeguarding vulnerable children. There is also 18 high risks indicated in the report, and 3 medium risks. There's also 3 opportunity risks highlighted in the report, which are all currently scoring high, and 2 external risks. These are BCC1, which relates to flooding, and BCC3, which relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to highlight the upcoming plan section as it highlights some important changes made in the team. So we've recently migrated all the Q1 data to a new risk management system, which is now currently being used by service managers to assist with reporting on risks and updating risks at the Council. The rollout of the system has included workshops and review of current risks to the system, and has been overall positive feedback in relation to this. We are currently drafting the Director at Risk Reports for Q2 via the system, so that's an improvement. In addition, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. If it relates to the content of the risk itself, I will have to revert back to the risk owner, but I'm more than happy to follow that up.
Thank you very much. So, as I said, I'm suggesting that we discuss these together, so feel free to make points that are about the performance report, the risk report, or both, especially if they're intersecting points. However, before we jump in, I'll just say, and again, this is partly explaining for the public as well as reminding members, that we did undertake some specific training on how to scrutinise performance management reports recently. And one of the recommendations of that training was for the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board to really focus on the prioritising of scrutiny of performance reports. So let's try not to get too much into the detail of doing the scrutinising in this meeting if we can, to avoid just having the same conversations twice. The main point of the next sort of 45 minutes to an hour is to identify patterns and key concerns and then to ask the respective scrutiny commissions to go away and look at those in more detail, specifically because then those scrutiny commissions can, with enough notice, ask the relevant officers to come and present and to formulate in advance sufficiently detailed questions that we can get meaningful scrutiny of that performance. Because, as Paul and Guy have noted, knowledgeable though they are, they cannot necessarily answer on every single part of the council. So, yeah, just a reminder to keep it strategic and in a prioritising mode as much as you can. So, I've got a few, but I won't hog the mic. I'll come back to me later. So, who wants to start? Councillor Foda.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for the introductions to the reports. I shall try to keep this on a strategic level, and one of them is for me to take away to scrutiny that I'm going to raise. But looking at its fair and inclusive 1, FI1, the percent of major residential planning applications. This is actually, it's a target to get things done in a timescale. And the government pushes us to make determination of planning quick. However, what it does is it contradicts to other objectives we have, like getting lots of affordable housing out of new development and so on. So it shows we're not doing it fast, but we also weren't getting what might be arguably one of the highest profile outcomes from the negotiation process, which is what happens when the planning is processed. So I'm just wondering how we will deal with that, and it's not something we can clarify here, but it seems to be a challenge that is going to defeat us. The more we want to get out of the application negotiation, the less likely it's going to be quick and hitting this target. So that's one thing to raise, and it links to BPC 425, which is the number of affordable homes delivered. But I have one on a different topic as well, which is on page
Can I just jump in and clarify who are you directing that to and what action are you seeking on that one?
I suppose it is something for the Development Management Service, because they're the ones having to hit a target, but also having to get things out of the application process, which is the negotiation process. And they might need more resources to do the negotiating, but they also might need more resources to hit the target, because they're clearly not even processing in time, which is, so it's about how we address not only our resources, but also actually the skill of the negotiation, because that's going to get perhaps more affordable housing, or forego something else that we would have got, which relates back to earlier public forum comments.
Given that affordable housing is coming to a future growth and regen scrutiny, can I, sorry, I keep giving you jobs, David, but can I suggest that forms part of it? Great.
Duly noted. Thank you for noting that. Can I raise one other one, which it causes me concern, but it's going to come back to me as Community Scrutiny Chair, which is the on page 193, which is W2 BPC 541, which is increasing the percentage of household waste sent for reuse, recycling and composting. And I'm not happy with the explanation given there, so it is something I would want to take to scrutiny when we scrutinise the waste service, because it says recycling is negatively impacted by the overall volume of household waste going up exponentially during lockdown. So the more homeworking there is, the more actually your packaging and your waste is at home, not at your workplace. But this is used as an excuse for saying proportionally less is getting recycled as a percent of the waste stream. And I'm not happy with that. The reason I'm not is because if we've got good recycling habits at home and we've got more packaging, we'll do more recycling at home. And frequently, as someone in a workplace, the argument is, can't people bring their good habits to the workplace? The workplace needs to reflect what they're used to doing at home. But if we were doing it at workplaces or when we're eating out, which we're not maybe doing anymore during lockdown, why weren't we doing it at home? Why was it getting worse? Because there was just more material, not more difficult to recycle material. So why were the habits deteriorating? And that, to me, is quite a big worry, and it's something we might have to bring up at community scrutiny.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kent, but I'm just going to jump in first to say something that hopefully helps set the scene a little bit. So the OSM leads, which is chairs of each of the individual scrutiny commissions, plus myself and the vice chair, did have a preliminary look at the performance report before now to identify what the themes, the most pressing themes in the performance report might be. And the three that we identified then, which OSM is welcome to modify, but this is our sort of opening gambit, is the one that Councillor Foda has just mentioned, the proportion of household waste going for reuse, recycling and composting. And so we were going to suggest that that goes to community scrutiny. So it sounds like the chair of community scrutiny is willing and able, so that's good. The other two were the increase in take-up of free early educational entitlement by eligible 2-year-olds is both low and getting worse. Excuse me. Now, we recognise that some of that poor take-up will be because of the pandemic and parents not being willing to or keen to send their kids to that. However, it is still something that's very important for the well-being and education of the children in our city, and the fact that it's bad and getting worse is not a good sign. So we were asking if that could be looked at in more detail in people scrutiny, and I will let Councillor Kent answer that when I come to him in just a second. And finally, the other one that is both below target and getting worse is the percentage of employment offers made by the council to people living in the 10% most deprived areas. And yeah, that clearly, if we can hit the target on that, that will have multiple benefits across different parts of the city. So we thought that warranted detailed scrutiny as well. But yeah, do feel free to suggest tweaks to that or other things that you think are particular priorities. And I'll start with Councillor Kent.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll be happy to look into that. Not surprisingly, I wanted to raise a different figure though, and it's one marked green with a nice green arrow pointing up, which means everything is looking good. And that is BPB225E, which is the increase in percentage of final EHCPs issued within 20 weeks, excluding exception cases. The reason I raise this is because there's statistics, and then damn lies. This isn't a damn lie, it is completely accurate, but it has been manipulated. Admittedly, the Department for Education have given us permission to manipulate this statistic, so if there's any blame, it lies with them. So generally, when EHCPs come in, they're dealt with in receipt order. The Department of Education has actually allowed Bristol City Council to take a proportion of them and fast-track them, because we've got so many in the queue of outstanding EHCPs which haven't been done. I fully understand why that is, and part of the reason of that is because obviously if you're applying, you really don't want to hear there's a 40, 50-week queue that you're about to join, and at least you've got some chance you're going to be in the fast-track group. So I'm not necessarily attacking that, but the problem then is if we look at this statistic, it's sort of implying that everything is going really well. Well, in fact, I'm afraid the truth is, and I think we began to see some of the truth in those questions and the answers to those questions earlier, is the complete opposite. And Jeff raised actually the most important question, which is how many people are stuck in the queue waiting? Now, as it happens, there's a freedom of information request that gives us that figure. Let me just find it a second so I am accurate, because of course, as we know, every figure changes the next day. So the important thing is I give you the date of when that. So as of, this is the council's answer to the freedom of information request. As of the 31st of August, there were 625 live applications. These are EHCPs that have been applied for, which are still being looked at. Of those, 320 were already outside of the 20-week process. The issue here is there's been a substantial increase in the amount of applications, and unfortunately, no increase in our ability to be able to deal with those applications and conclude them. It does look pretty bad when you look at the figures of where we're at. If we take a look back in 2019, there were 620 odd applications, and we decided 410. So we began to see the backlog really beginning to build, and that's when we sort of became very aware of it. And to be fair, the administration put in place additional resources to try to tackle that backlog. And in 2020, there were over 700 decisions made on EHCPs. But then again, there was also virtually the same amount of applications made. You do lose some, because some are assessed at 6 weeks as not needing an EHCP. But our response to government was in 2019, only 3% were rejected at the 6-week period. Now here in 2021, and this is where I really worried, in the first 6 months, there's been over 450 applications, but only 230 decisions. That means we have a massive backlog rebuilding up again. And that's why I come back to statistics and damn lies. The statistic is right, what is given, but it's giving us, I think, a false presentation that everything is okay there, where in fact, in the last 6 months, 9 months, things have got substantially worse. And that seems to be a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot more applications going into the system. That's certainly no fault of officers or the administration. But two, we're not in any way, it appears, upping our ability to be able to deal with those amount of applications. And I think that needs to be flagged now before it becomes a complete crisis. I think we're at the beginning of it, but soon we will see people waiting again over a year. At the moment, there are still quite a substantial amount of people waiting long term. In fact, that figure tells us 81 EHCP applications as of the 31st of August this year. We're already at over 40 weeks, which is a substantial amount of time, but soon that will go from 81 to probably 181, then 281 as the backlog accelerates. So I guess the question here is at this point, what is going to be done to ensure that backlog does not continue to accelerate? Because it's not something that can be instantly dealt with. You need staff, they need to be trained. In addition to that, we need educational psychologists. So I raise that now. It also does relate into the corporate risk register, because there, sort of implying that everything is level. I don't think it is. To be fair, it's quite possible this is not being flagged up by senior officers, because they're using this traffic light system. And when you look at the figure, you think everything looks good. It's only when you dig underneath it do you realise there is a major problem only a few months away, or already on top of us, probably.
Thank you, and very thorough digging. So I understand that you want to look into that in more detail in your scrutiny commission alongside the one that I've suggested you do, and I'm happy.
Add that to the others you've suggested we look at.
Yeah,
yes.
and I'm certainly fine with that. So I think, yeah, if you're okay to take on those three, I think that makes sense. Did you also want an officer to have a go at answering your final question there now? I don't know if they'll...
I think that would be pretty unfair to the officers here, because they just process the figures they're given. But if someone wants to add to it, that's fine.
Well, in relation to the data, I mean, you're right. It is the fact that it's green does mask something. What that doesn't say is that the service aren't acutely aware of that. On the open data platform, just looking at it now, although the figures haven't been updated recently, they do publish and are acutely aware of this on a daily basis. So I'm pretty confident in saying on behalf of the service that they are on top of this. Clearly, when you explore it in the scrutiny, they will give you or seek to explore further options for resolution and progress from their own perspective. But I am pretty happy to say that they are aware of this and the data is available on a daily basis.
So I just wanted to reassure Councillor Kent that, so I was aware of the situation that you've just described, and so are senior officers. That's not inconsistent, as we've just discussed, with the data. As you know, it's an agreed approach, agreed with the department. The data and the performance indicator is what it is. I think actually you've illustrated very well why performance indicators are only ever the start of a conversation about performance. And so, no one is looking to hide anything here. We're aware of the growing challenge that you're referring to, and it would obviously be useful to explore that further with you in depth through scrutiny.
Thank you. I guess the big question is, what are we going to do about it? But that's fine. I'll write to you and we can talk further.
Yeah, thank you. A number of points, and some of them relating to this same topic, because there's always a question about the targets that are set. And I understand the targets being set at what is decided is achievable. But I also think one needs to look in the case of the healthcare plans is what should we be aiming for and what should we be expecting. And I'd put it for the healthcare plans and affordable housing. But if we put the healthcare plans in context, we're talking of 600 families in trauma and challenge and not able to find a resolution. So I do see that as something that we should be concerned about and pressing for a solution. I accept there is not an easy solution, and I'm not wanting us to turn this into a political challenge, but I do wonder whether, not just going to the Scrutiny Commission, but whether we shouldn't be flagging up to Cabinet that we are concerned about this issue and that it does need to be resourced, to be resolved. So I put that in that context, and I also put it in the context of affordable housing, that I think everybody accepts the numbers that we're targeting aren't enough affordable houses. Now, it's not enough to just set a figure. I understand that one's actually got to have the ability to deliver it. But somewhere, we should be considering whether Scrutiny should be challenging that process and engaging with that process in finding a way to improve the outcome. Now, I then move on to a topic of timing, because we are looking here at the Q1 report, and we are now 2.5 weeks into Q3. So, and I understand why financial figures, for example, can't come to Scrutiny until they've gone to Cabinet. I don't understand why performance figures can't come to us at the same time, or even before they go to Cabinet, because they're showing a direction of travel and they're showing what is happening and an ability for us to be involved in that process. So I just think we do need to make this not an academic exercise. This is a real issue with real people suffering as a result of the directions of travel, and we need to highlight it. The other point, as we're taking the two reports together, is in terms of risk management. And I very specifically don't really want to comment on the risk, but there is a risk about delivery of capital programmes. But again, the risk report is Q1, but it's very clear from last Friday that there are issues arising from relationships between the authorities that make up the combined authority, and I would see that as a very significant risk. I'm very keen in my capacity as chair of the WECA Audit Committee to not express an opinion on any of that issue, and I don't want to criticise anybody, but I do think Bristol needs to be recognising that as a risk that could jeopardise some of the schemes that we're anticipating to happen. And whilst it may not have been identified at the end of June, I think it was being identified not that long afterwards, and I would feel it should be referred to. And I'm certainly not looking to Mike to have to comment on that, because it's an issue that is best kept and dealt with in private, in my opinion, but the actual risk needs to be recognised in public. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, bear with me a second.
So I was just suggesting to the chair that if you are going to refer items for detailed scrutiny by the relevant Scrutiny Commission, it would seem sensible to wait until that had happened before you ask Cabinet to respond. It just seems odd to do it the other way around. I would have thought you'd want the benefit of the detailed work your commissions are going to do, and on the back of that, raise your concerns with Cabinet. But I mean, it's your decision. That's what I was suggesting to the chair, though. And if I may, just while I've got the mic, Jeff, your other suggestion about seeing performance information before Cabinet, again, you know, given that you are rightly here to challenge Cabinet about overall performance, it just seems appropriate that they have the opportunity to see the data first in order to be able to respond to that challenge. So that would seem the right way around to me, I have to say.
I guess the point, I infer that the point that Councillor Gollop was making on raising something with Cabinet now is that since it is quite pressing, it would seem a shame to wait. I don't know exactly when the next, off the top of my head, when the next relevant scrutiny commissions are, but potentially wait a while. So maybe rather than writing to Cabinet making specific recommendations, which I agree we wouldn't be in a position to do if we haven't scrutinised it in detail, it might still be worth a letter from the relevant scrutiny chair saying, dear Cabinet, FYI, we are looking at this in detail in the coming meeting because we have concerns. You may wish to also look at it closely, or words to that effect.
Yeah, I mean, if I can clarify, I take Mike's point totally, and I certainly wasn't looking to for it to be any controversial statement, but I think I was actually of the view that out of courtesy, we should be letting Cabinet know that it's a matter that scrutiny was concerned about and will be considering at the next meeting, and possibly indicating to the Cabinet that if they feel they have anything they'd like to contribute on to that discussion, that we'd welcome a response from them. I certainly don't want it to be I don't want it to be turned into a political bun fight, because both issues I refer to are much too serious for that to happen. But equally, for us to just review it and pass a comment, and particularly with budget processes now in place, flagging up at this point we are concerned about something that may have resources implications, for example, it's better to do it now than save it until February when the budget's already set.
So you're proposing that specifically for the EHCP thing, or?
I was suggesting for EHPC and for the affordable homes, I think, is two issues that from the public statements and the discussions, I think we should be flagging up that we are concerned and that scrutiny will be asking for some input. That was my suggestion.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, actually, I just wonder more generally if now you've chosen this style of working, Osm referring performance issues to scrutiny commissions, to actually flag to Cabinet all of those that you've referred and inviting the Cabinet members to get involved in the subsequent discussion at the Commission. So rather than differentiate between them, simply say, these are the ones that you've raised a flag about. You're asking the Commissions to look in more detail and invite the Cabinet, relevant Cabinet members to participate, assuming that's something you'd welcome.
I'm happy, well, I say happy, I'm happy to delegate for that to be written in my name, if that's okay. Great. Okay, I had, who the hell did I have? I had a hand somewhere. Was it you? Councillor Wilcox, sorry, I really need another caffeinated drink and I don't have one.
That's okay. I can appreciate that, and in the state of your cold as well. So a couple of things. In relation to the business plan, I would like to highlight the well-being section in the fact that there are 13 different performance indicators which are in the state of annual data not due. And I am concerned that there are surprises hidden away in there. And I would like to try and get some early conception of the data that's hidden away in there. Would that be possible?
Probably looking at Guy here.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm just looking at them now. Some of them are quality of life, which of course reported annually, and they just come once. A couple there are significant lags in some of the data fields here because of the way they're reported. The service area have agreed the targets, and in some cases with council or cabinet members. We can certainly look at that again when we do the performance target process during the course of early next year. But these were considered important. It's just unfortunate that the data is either annual or in some cases 6 monthly. It's frustrating, I agree.
Indeed it is. And looking at going forward to the risk section of the reports, and page 207, the major threat risks, it's something that I've raised at audit, in that we have a good 10 risks that have been amber for the past previous 4 quarters. And that's because their scoring actually hasn't changed. We give the impression that no work is being done on them. I know for a fact that there are work being done and the situation does change. But I would like some recognition that they've been in that state for 4 quarters and that they need to be actually put up into a higher risk category if they've been stationary for that period of time.
I can refer that back to the risk owners. At EDMs, we do discuss risks that haven't moved score over following quarters. That's one of the points we do raise, as well as a high scoring risk and decreasing and increasing risk to make sure there is that assurance there, but we'll raise that with the relevant risk owners.
Thank
Paul,
you.
just for transparency for members of the public, EDMs?
The sort of major management team meetings for the respective directorates.
Perfect. I haven't been consistent in calling out acronyms, apologies, but I thought that was a good idea too. Okay, I'm going to jump in next if that's okay. So I've got 3 points. One is in the risk assessment. Where are we? So provision of leisure centres, CRR 42 on page, I think it's 207 still. Yep, further down 207. Is shown as improving. So it was a very bad risk. It's shown as getting better. That surprised me in light of the news that Kingsdown Leisure Centre is proposed to be closed. I wondered if this assessment happened before we knew about that, or otherwise if there's any explanation of why we think that risk is getting better even though the thing feared is happening.
Again, that would be one for the relevant risk owners. They're responsible for the scoring on their own risks. The reporting period would be ending effective from the 1st of July, so I don't know when that
I think we didn't know about it then. Yeah.
So that might be reflective of that, but I can certainly discuss that with the risk owner, pass on any feedback.
Yes, well, it indicates that perhaps the assessment of risk wasn't very accurate if we thought that the risk was starting to go away at exactly the point that it hit. Now, Councillor Foda, I know that investment in leisure is something that's on your work programme for a meeting soon-ish.
That's correct, yes.
So presumably you'll be looking into
Hopefully we'll
into issues with leisure centres generally then, so maybe if I can suggest that you specifically look at sort of risk-related stuff.
Yep,
with that.
shall do.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll get a little note to remind us of that when the time comes.
Yep, Lucy is typing furiously. Okay, my other points, on the risk assessment, risk performance summary, the 3 very bad and not getting better ones at the top of page 207. So that's long-term major capital projects, failure to deliver affordable homes, as we discussed earlier, and safeguarding vulnerable children. Are the respective chairs intending to look at those? Do you either have things on your work programme already, or could you include it in any of those? I'm getting a nod from Growth and Regen. And you've already said about, let's see, hang on, I'm just checking which. Okay, so 2 of them are Growth and Regen, and 1 is people, and the safeguarding vulnerable children, I assume you are, if you want to say anything more.
Well, yeah, clearly that's quite concerning. I think we've got something looking at it in the future, but we may need to put that on our agenda, somehow squeeze everything up to make sure we do look at that.
Yes, yeah, it is obviously has the potential to be very serious, so I would suggest that that's something that's prioritised. Final point from me probably is to agree with Councillor Gollop's point about could Scrutiny, that is, not just OSM, have the performance and risk reports in parallel with Cabinet. Now, I'm not suggesting we have them before Cabinet, but it does seem like if we wait until the public Cabinet meeting has happened and noted those reports before it can even go to us, given that Cabinet only happens every so often and Scrutiny happens even less often, that's building quite a long lag time into our ability to scrutinise and respond to emerging issues. And so I would like to hear, so I'm talking about performance and risk here. I'd like to hear from Guy and Paul what they thought about providing these to scrutiny in parallel, or, you know, incrementally later, but not you know, days perhaps, rather than waiting for weeks or months.
So I think that's something we need to take away to Cabinet, because it effectively you are going to be, you know, holding them to account for those performance issues. That's why it's organised in the way that it is at the moment, to give them the chance to consider that prior to it being subsequently scrutinised. I think, you know, we'd have to talk to them about how they felt about that change.
Can I just hear from Paul and Guy if they have anything to add, and then I'll go back to the floor. You may not have anything on top.
No, I would have certainly deferred to Mike around that for that very reason. I mean, the reports are ready, but it's just a question of due process and following the guidance that Mike has advised there.
Yeah, just to say, I'm not necessarily saying that they have to be published at exactly the same time, because with the new strategy that we're taking to scrutinising performance and risk, is that the OSM leads see these first and decide what the key areas to focus on are. And so I wonder if it might be possible for us to get it at around the same time, even if it's not exactly the same day. Great. Well, I'll leave that with you to go away. Okay, now back to the floor. I've got Councillor Foda, then Councillor Gollop. I have a feeling Councillor Foda was also on exactly that issue, so in just a moment, yeah.
Yeah, Chair. Thanks. It is on that issue. The scrutiny in depth of any of these issues would be carried out, as we've said, in many cases in the specific service scrutiny, and you know, certainly most of those only meet 3 times in a whole year. So waiting for the next scrutiny after something has been to Cabinet could be literally months. But the other point is that we have had occasions, and it varies, that the relevant Cabinet member attends the scrutiny and is there to answer questions and to discuss their decision making. In Cabinet, they would only make the decision. In communities, we could have a discussion about what might influence the decision and concerns we might have about performance or risk that needs to be taken into account. So, to my mind, there is also a different option, which is that the discussion can take place with the Cabinet member at the scrutiny.
And indeed, that was what I was suggesting earlier, but not in advance of them seeing the information, unless they chose to. I mean, that's effectively what the implication of the earlier question was. Look, I'm more than happy to take away and talk to the Cabinet about this. I certainly see the benefit of engaging the Cabinet members in your deliberations. That's why I suggested that earlier.
Great. Sorry, I might have misunderstood that. Thanks.
Councillor Gollop, and then I've got a closing point on this.
Yeah, no, it was really only that I think I certainly don't want to make this an issue of controversy with the Cabinet. I'd rather save that for other things that are more important. And I was actually wondering whether, Mike can raise it, but whether we might have actually asked Councillors Pearce and Bradshaw to actually relay the comment is really more how can we engage more quickly than we currently do with the information and relay it that way, because it's really only in that context, and I don't think I don't see it as something that we're holding Cabinet members to account for. It's actually to understanding directions of travel and identifying issues more quickly. But if we put it the wrong way, it appears to be a confrontational challenge, and that was not how I was envisaging it. So just a suggestion, we could try a more informal approach to see if we can engage.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I just want to ask just a clarification question. My assumption, perhaps it's incorrect, is that Cabinet members would privately see the performance and risk reports for their portfolio before they were published in the public Cabinet papers. Is that correct, or have I?
Yes, it is. It's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you'd expect.
Yeah. So I don't think anyone is suggesting that we see them before Cabinet members privately see them. I think we're only suggesting that we avoid the several-month delay of waiting until Cabinet papers have been published and heard at Cabinet before we can have them published in scrutiny. Anyway, over to Councillor Bradshaw.
I'm not going to offer any great solution to this, but in the comments you just made, I wondered if there was a stage in this where if and when the performance figures for the portfolio came to the Cabinet member at their briefing, which used to happen in my case, in between that and it going to the public meeting of the Cabinet, whether that's the point that it might come here. So just think of that as an informal stage, because I think it would be odd if they came here without the Cabinet member having much time to review them with their own officer team. So I think that might work.
Yeah, that's what I meant basically. Okay, well, can we leave it with the officers to go away and find back, or do we want the Labour members of this group to do an informal approach? Would they be willing to do so, first of all, I should ask?
Happy to do so, but I'm not sure that it'll be any quicker than not sure that I run up 2 flights of stairs any quicker than the officers can, or Mike can.
You can time it.
Okay, well,
Please not.
I'll ask the officers to send. Oh, sorry, I did all that without my mic on. Apologies. I think we're done on that item on performance and risk now. Thank you very much, Paul and Guy. Right, just bear with me a second while I prepare for the next one. Okay, so the next agenda item is the work programme. First thing that I want to say on this, I did say at the beginning, but I'm aware that not everyone watches all 3 hours of this in one sitting. One of the things of note on the work programme is that scrutiny of the proposed clean air zone in Bristol was originally scheduled for today's meeting. But you'll see that there is a note in the work programme explaining that this is now coming to a future meeting because the council has not yet heard back from the government on the council's latest proposals, and so there's nothing new that we can look at this stage. So that's all I can tell you for now, but we will be informed as soon as there is more to know about. The other main thing to talk about under this work programme agenda item is scrutiny of the council's plans for carbon reduction. So that's obviously a really big and important topic, and it's something that in the work programme setting workshops that we had in September, we identified as something that we should be looking at, but that we needed to have a bit more of a think about how and who and when and on what time scale we do that. And so a small working group of members of OSM were tasked with going away and having a think about that, and I understand they've now met and want to present their proposal to this meeting for us to sign off on. I haven't, however, been told which of you it is. Or you can do it together as a team if you like.
I'm quite happy to say something. The members have been sent, am I right? All members have been sent a short statement in 3 paragraphs of our discussions. Are you asking me to read it out, or has everyone read it that's been sent it?
It was only sent 13 minutes before this meeting started, so I think it's fair to assume that not everybody will have had the opportunity to read it yet if they were in transit. Okay.
The statement was this: the City Council has the Mayor's Climate Emergency Action Plan 2019, which sets out some of the initial actions in response to the climate emergency. We also have the Climate and Ecological Emergency Programme, which includes a set of new projects that were initiated in November 2020. However, the majority of the Council's response to climate change is included in the activities of services across the Council, for example, energy, transport, housing and waste. We can present the working group with an inventory of the existing emissions from the Council and the wider city in order to provide a baseline. So that's both what the Council does and what's known about the city emissions. The City Council is currently preparing its service planning on the back of the new corporate strategy priorities, which include climate resilience and carbon neutrality. Resilience is the impacts of climate change on the city, and carbon neutrality is cutting the emissions that cause it. In the new year, we will be able to present all of the service plan activity relating to those two activities, which would give this Oversight and Scrutiny Management Board an overview of the Council's current and short-term planned activity on climate change. We propose that this would provide a good basis to enable the working group to identify any significant gaps in or areas where the scale or pace of activity could be strengthened. Members would do this making use of the existing frameworks of good practice for local authorities, which we draw from elsewhere. These would then provide the focus for further deep dives by this body or by the other scrutiny commissions into those specific areas, integrating it with other policy and programme development. We propose that this working group commences in February or March 2022 and takes place over 3 meetings, at which point other potential work streams will have been identified. So that's what we said. There are different ways of doing it, but this was the proposal.
Great, and it's probably worth clarifying. I expect everyone in the room understands this, but I think that statement was drafted somewhat from an officer perspective. So when it says we can present the working group, the we there is the officers who will be presenting that information to Martin rather than Martin having direct access himself. But so just to sort of paraphrase that into slightly less councilese and to make sure I've understood it, the basic proposal is that a working group is set up that is a subgroup of this committee, which will meet 3 times from February or March 2022 onwards. And it will start by looking at what the council is currently doing on decarbonisation. Then it will look at what is already written into the council's service plans, which are based off the corporate strategy we've just seen and were already going to be written over the next few months anyway. And then the working group will look at gaps that are neither already being done nor planned imminently in the service plans, and explore what can be done to tackle those. Okay? Are there any comments or questions on that as a way forward? Councillor Bradshaw.
I think this is a helpful piece of work. I just wondered how this would connect, for example, to the One City plan, because obviously we've been discussing the corporate strategy, but there's a whole set of work outside of that involving the council and its partners, and I think it would be helpful if we could just understand how that's going to be linked in.
Thank you. Those of you in the working group, had you thought about that specifically yet? Or do any of the officers want to chip in?
Not to my recollection, no.
I think the point is we noted that there's what the council controls and there's what happens in the city, and the partnerships that involve the council are obviously going to be important. We did debate the fact that there are different ways we could look at this, but in the first instance, this is the best way to start and to look for the big gaps or the big areas of concern that exist. And some of those will be outside of the council, there's no doubt, will be partnership issues.
Yeah, I note that it says inventory of existing emissions from the council and wider city, so we're certainly not limiting ourselves only to council ones. Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognise that dealing with climate change and decarbonisation is everybody's job. The danger is that we recruit somebody to do a job and then we say, okay, we don't need to do that anymore because that's their job. not pointing at you. Sorry, I should have done that. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So it's everybody's job, and whilst we can control what this organisation, which is already well ahead of the curve for most organisations within the city and other local authorities, we do need to bear in mind how we can influence others. Because like I say, I mean, I'm not very good at influencing people. I put solar panels on my roof 10 years ago. What's keeping everybody?
Well, for what it's worth, I think it would be good to look at how this interacts with One City, if that's possible and isn't expanding the scope too much. Perhaps that'll come out naturally as part of identifying who can do what. But yeah, I think that would be worthwhile. Councillor Gollop.
It was, I'm very happy with this, but I'm not quite sure whether it was that I didn't respond to an email or I wasn't included, but I would guess that at all stages it would be right that all four parties were involved in this process, even for working it up. So, and taking Steve's point, it is all our problems, and I think we'd all want to be involved with it. So I'm just flagging that up. The other issue I think that we do have to talk about, and this could be the working group that looks at it, is actually how scrutiny moves forward and keeps this whole issue high enough on the scrutiny agenda. And that's something I think we do need to work through, because the number of times already today we've talked about the fact that the scrutiny commissions meeting every 3 months don't have enough time to look at issues, and we have here the most fundamental issue that affects all of us. So I do think somewhere in the period running up to the end of the civic year, we need to be making sure we give clear recommendations as to how scrutiny can engage with the net zero targets over the next few years, because this is going to be the critical time for challenge and holding to account.
So taking your point in reverse order, I think the inference of the final sentence of what Martin shared with us and what we've got in our inboxes is saying that the working group will meet 3 times from March 2022, and blah, 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 at which point other potential work streams will have been identified. So I think my understanding of the point is that they'll be meeting in, I don't know if I want to say rapid succession, but fairly close meetings, more so than our regular scrutiny commissions, and will then be able to recommend next steps from.
Yeah, so my point was that at the annual council meeting in May, if there was anything that was needing to be recommended that needed changing, it's got to be done
changing to a constitution or something like that
before the annual meeting, so that it can be included in any changes in the constitution that are required. So I was only flagging up. We don't want to lose that sight of that time frame.
That's a good point. If one of the recommendations was to set up a standing climate change scrutiny commission, for example, if I can ask the members of that working group to bear in mind that deadline of the annual general meeting for think about that question specifically. Your other point about political representation, off the top of my head, the request for who wanted to be part of that happened in the OSM Leeds meeting that we had online a couple of weeks ago. We asked for volunteers from any of the representatives there, and the ones that we got were councillors Fodor, Wilcox and Kent. They were open to the Labour and Conservative members at the meeting as well, and I'm sure it's not... You got, yes, you... Yeah, you... Oh, so it was in an email afterwards
and I was
then,
there
wasn't
and
it?
didn't. The point I was making, not trying to find out how it happened, but only to say I am sure my group, and I suspect that the Labour group as well, would very much want to be involved in it, and the fact we didn't reply at the time was neither here nor there. Is that fair, Mark?
I would have loved to have taken part, but I had to take some sick leave, so it just fell through the gaps, as it were. But I'm very pleased with the work that's been done. I think it's helpful.
And does that mean that you would be interested in taking part in the working group as it continues?
Me or another colleague, yes.
Okay. And I've just been advised that one of your Conservative colleagues was invited to take part but wasn't able to take part in that initial meeting. So yes, but I agree that
Fine. My point was I wanted to make clear it does have cross-party support, and the best way we can do that is by making sure that one of our colleagues turns up, and if one of my colleagues can't, I'll make every effort to be there in future.
Great, agreed. Thank you. Are there any points about that scrutiny of carbon reduction specifically, or about the scrutiny work programme generally? I'm surprised by the lack of moaning about the clean air zone being delayed. If I were not in the chair position, I would be using this moment to have a moan, but you can take that as read. Okay, all right. In that case, we're going to finish early, folks.
Actually, have we got any indication from government about when they may respond to us?
No,
Mike?
not last I heard, unless you've got something fresh.
It's imminent, but has been for a while. We'll let you know as soon as...
One of those.
Imminent for a while.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, one of the things they're grappling with is a new ministerial team, which I think may have slowed things down a little bit.
Yeah, so the advice I've had from officers is that as soon as they know, we'll know. Okay, so next agenda item is Mayor's Forward Plan, which is just a standing item. Obviously, this informs our scrutiny work programme. I'm not anticipating a discussion on this. This is just something that's included in the papers to make sure we all get a chance to see it. And of course, it is all published on the council website as well. Does anyone have anything they need to flag up? I guess the point that Councillor Townsend was making earlier about something that was meant to be on the forward plan not being is one of the points to note. Is there anything else?
I'd like to thank officers for the new improved forward plan.
Yes, that's a good point. Here, it has got better. It looks further ahead, and there is some improving detail on it, albeit I think we would all like to see a little bit more.
Yeah, and it is right, Steve's right, that we do acknowledge it. There is still things that could be improved, but I think we should acknowledge and recognise it in a submission to Cabinet, because we've been battling for that for probably 10 years. So it's it's very...
Not let excellent be the enemy of very good.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Can I comment, Chair?
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's certainly improved. There's more information. We welcome that. The fact that an awful lot of it is piled up as sometime by June next year still doesn't help Scrutiny plan its work programme. So I hope we can continue to get better information about when things are anticipated and the timing. And there are still a few gaps, which I have raised with officers, that there are things I know I've been told we need to scrutinise because they're being worked on, and they don't even appear in this necessarily. So let's hope it can continue to improve.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to move on from the Mayor's Forward Plan. Final agenda item is minutes of the West of England Combined Authorities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So that's our counterpart Scrutiny Committee at the sub-regional level. And we received those papers as a standing item. Last time I heard, they had a chair designate rather than a permanent chair. So one question I've got is, does anyone know whether they have a permanent chair yet? Because there was talk of now my successor on OSM liaising with them. They do, great. Well, in that case, could I suggest an action for my successor to have a conversation with their counterpart at the WECA level? Because there was some discussion that we need to make sure that when we're looking at related items, we do so in coordination rather than doubling up.
I think, is it three of us? Three of us are on the WECA scrutiny, and I think three of us are also on WECA audit. So therefore, OSM is remarkably well represented.
Okay, would you or any of the others that are double or triple hatting like to make any comments about these minutes to draw our particular attention to? I see they're also looking at climate emergency.
There is, for me, there's so much going on at the moment that I think the wider issues that have hit the local media are probably more relevant in terms of WECA, and I think it's best not to comment in detail on those and hope that they can be resolved internally very quickly.
Chair, we weren't actually there because it clashed with another meeting here.
I wasn't sure. I knew about the clash.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether you'd all chosen one or the
No.
other, or whether you'd split it up between you.
If you look on the minutes, it actually says we gave our
Apologies.
apologies. Yeah.
Okay.
It was really bad timing.
Yes. Okay, well, let's take those as noted, but hope that we can coordinate better with them next time. Okay, and with that, we've finished our agenda. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice afternoon.